At my niece's birthday party, my innocent 6-year-old daughter accidentally put cake on my niece's shirt. My sister snapped and slapped her so hard she hit the ground, and she went ahead and grabbed her head and shoved it in the cake, crying in front of 230 guests. Everyone got stunned. Before I could do anything, my parents went next to my niece and cleaned her up while calming my sister down, and then shouted at me and said, "Get your daughter and get lost." Mom added, "Some children just don't know how to behave at parties." But I warned them they'd regret it, and just 10 minutes later, I got a call from my dad, his voice shaking. "My name is Tina, and I'm a single mom to the most precious 6-year-old girl named Ruby. She's got these huge brown eyes and the sweetest personality you could imagine. Sometimes she's a little clumsy, but what kid isn't? My sister Monica has always been the golden child in our family. She married well, has 2 kids, and lives in this massive house in the suburbs. Her daughter Sasha was turning 8, and Monica decided to throw what she called the party of the century. When I say massive party, I mean it. Monica rented out the entire community center, hired professional entertainers, brought in a DJ, and invited what felt like half the town. There were 230 guests according to the final count: friends, family, neighbors, co-workers, basically anyone Monica wanted to impress. The decorations were Pinterest perfect, with a princess theme that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Ruby was so excited to celebrate her cousin's birthday. She'd been talking about it for weeks, practicing her happy birthday song, and she'd even helped me pick out the perfect gift for Sasha. We arrived at the party looking our best. I'd bought Ruby a new pink dress specifically for the occasion, and I was wearing the nicest outfit I owned. The party was in full swing when we got there. Kids were running around everywhere, the entertainment was top-notch, and the cake was this elaborate 3-tier princess castle creation that must have cost hundreds of dollars. Monica was in her element, floating around like the perfect hostess, making sure everyone knew how much effort and money she'd put into this celebration. Ruby was having the time of her life. She was playing with the other kids, dancing to the music, and just being her usual bubbly self. I was actually feeling proud and happy, thinking about how well-behaved she was being and how beautiful she looked in her new dress. Then it happened. During the cake ceremony, all the kids were gathered around the main table. Sasha was standing in front of her massive castle cake, and Monica was busy taking photos from every possible angle. The other parents were recording videos, and everyone was singing happy birthday. Ruby, being shorter than most of the other kids, was trying to get a better view of the cake cutting. As she moved closer, someone behind her accidentally bumped into her. Ruby stumbled forward, and her hand instinctively shot out to catch herself. Unfortunately, her small hand landed right on the edge of the cake table, and a small piece of frosting got onto her finger. In that split second of confusion and trying to regain her balance, she accidentally brushed against Sasha's shirt, leaving a tiny smear of pink frosting on the fabric. It was such a small thing. Honestly, you could barely see it unless you were looking closely. It was the kind of accident that happens at every single children's party ever thrown. I immediately stepped forward to apologize and help clean it up, but I didn't even get the chance to speak. Monica's reaction was instantaneous and completely disproportionate. Her face went from party host smile to absolute rage in less than a second. Before I could even process what was happening, she had crossed the space between them and delivered a sharp, hard slap across Ruby's face. The sound echoed through the community center. The music seemed to stop, conversations died mid-sentence, and everyone turned to stare. Ruby, who had been reaching up to apologize to Sasha, was completely caught off guard. The force of Monica's slap sent my little girl stumbling backward, and she lost her footing completely, falling hard onto the floor. But Monica wasn't done. While Ruby was still on the ground, looking up with shock and confusion in her eyes, Monica grabbed a handful of Ruby's hair and actually shoved her face directly into the elaborate cake. The beautiful princess castle crumbled as my daughter's face was pressed into the frosting and decorations. Ruby started crying immediately, not just regular crying, but the kind of heartbroken, confused sobbing that breaks your heart. She was covered in cake, her new pink dress was ruined, and she was sitting on the floor in front of 230 people who were all staring at her in stunned silence. I was frozen for about 3 seconds, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My sister had just physically assaulted my 6-year-old daughter over an accident that barely even mattered. Ruby was crying, covered in cake, and clearly traumatized, while Sasha was standing there with a tiny spot of frosting on her shirt that you could barely see. But before I could move to comfort my daughter or confront my sister, my parents rushed into action. Instead of checking on Ruby, instead of asking if she was okay, instead of addressing the fact that Monica had just hit a child, they went straight to Sasha and began fussing over her like she was the victim in this situation. My mom started dramatically cleaning the small frosting spot off Sasha's shirt while my dad put his arm around Monica, actually comforting her like she was the one who needed support. Meanwhile, Ruby was still sitting on the floor, covered in cake and crying her heart out. "Tina, get your daughter and get lost," my dad said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is embarrassing." My mom looked up from cleaning Sasha's shirt and added, "Some children just don't know how to behave at parties." I felt like I was in an alternate universe. My daughter had been slapped, humiliated, and physically assaulted, and somehow she was being painted as the problem. The injustice of it all hit me like a truck, and I felt this surge of protective anger that I'd never experienced before. I walked over to Ruby, helped her up, and started wiping cake off her face with my hands. She was still crying and kept saying "I'm sorry, Mommy" over and over again, which broke my heart even more. She thought she was in trouble. This sweet, innocent little girl thought she had done something wrong. The entire community center was still silent, with 230 people watching this family drama unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the spectacle, but nobody stepped in to help or defend a 6-year-old child who had just been assaulted. I picked Ruby up, holding her close as she continued to cry into my shoulder. As I headed toward the exit, carrying my cake-covered, traumatized daughter, I turned back to look at my family. Monica was now playing the victim, dramatically telling anyone who would listen how her daughter's perfect party had been ruined. My parents were supporting her narrative, nodding along and shooting disapproving looks in my direction. That's when I stopped walking and turned around. "You're all going to regret this," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "What just happened here was child abuse, and you think Ruby is the problem. You're going to regret choosing to protect the abuser instead of the victim." Monica rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic, Tina. She needed to learn a lesson about being more careful. The only lesson here is about what kind of people you really are," I replied. "And trust me, this isn't over." I walked out of that community center with Ruby still crying in my arms, both of us covered in cake, while 230 people watched us leave in silence. The humiliation was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the fury I felt about how my daughter had been treated. I drove straight home, gave Ruby a bath, and spent the rest of the evening comforting her and explaining that she hadn't done anything wrong. She kept asking why Aunt Monica had been so mean to her, and why Grandma and Grandpa had been upset with her instead of helping her. How do you explain that kind of betrayal to a 6-year-old? But while I was putting Ruby to bed, my mind was already working. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to pretend this was just a family disagreement that we'd laugh about someday. Monica had crossed a line, and my parents had chosen their side. Now I was going to show them the consequences of their choices. The more I thought about what had happened, the angrier I became. Not just angry, I was furious in a way that felt completely foreign to me. I'm typically a calm, measured person. I don't lose my temper easily, and I certainly don't hold grudges. But watching my innocent daughter get physically assaulted and then blamed for her own assault had awakened something primal in me. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Ruby's confused little face when Monica's hand connected with her cheek. The sound of the slap echoing through that massive community center. The way Ruby fell, her new pink dress spreading around her as she hit the ground. And then Monica, this grown woman, grabbing my baby's hair and shoving her face into that cake while 230 people watched in stunned silence. But what made it even worse was my family's reaction. Not one person had rushed to help Ruby. Not one person had asked if she was okay. Instead, they'd all rallied around Monica, treating her like the victim of some great injustice. My own parents, Ruby's grandparents, had looked at their traumatized granddaughter sitting on the floor covered in cake and crying, and their response was to tell us to leave. I thought about all the times over the years that I'd made excuses for Monica's behavior. The way she'd always been dramatic and temperamental, but everyone just accepted it as that's just how Monica is. I remembered her throwing tantrums at family dinners when she didn't get enough attention, or the way she'd compete with other people's good news by immediately sharing something about herself. There was the time she'd ruined my college graduation party by starting a fight with my boyfriend at the time, claiming he'd been flirting with her. She'd caused such a scene that half the guests left early. When I confronted her about it later, she'd accused me of being jealous that men found her more attractive. My parents had sided with her then too, telling me I was being oversensitive and that I should be grateful Monica cared enough about my well-being to warn me about my boyfriend's wandering eye. Or the time she'd shown up to my baby shower when Ruby was on the way and spent the entire event talking about her own pregnancy with Sasha, even though Sasha was already 2 years old at the time. She'd brought photo albums and insisted on showing everyone pictures of Sasha's early milestones, completely overshadowing what was supposed to be a celebration for Ruby. When I tried to redirect the conversation back to the baby shower, Monica had gotten upset and accused me of not caring about her family. The pattern was always the same. Monica would do something inappropriate or hurtful, I would try to address it calmly, and then my parents would step in to defend her and make me feel like I was the one causing problems. They'd use phrases like "keep the peace" and "she doesn't mean anything by it" and "family is family." But this time was different. This time, Monica hadn't just embarrassed me or stolen attention from one of my milestones. This time, she'd physically hurt my child. This time, the victim wasn't me, it was an innocent 6-year-old who had never done anything to deserve such treatment. As I tucked Ruby into bed that night, she was still sniffling occasionally. She'd asked me 3 times if she was in trouble, and each time I'd assured her that she'd done nothing wrong. But I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes. She didn't understand why Aunt Monica had been so mean to her, or why Grandma and Grandpa had seemed upset with her instead of helping her. "Mommy," she'd whispered as I was turning off her light, "do you think Aunt Monica hates me?" My heart had broken all over again. "No, sweetheart," I told her. "Aunt Monica doesn't hate you. She just made a very bad choice today, and sometimes adults make bad choices when they're upset. But that doesn't mean it was your fault, and it doesn't mean you did anything wrong." "But why was everyone mad at me?" she'd asked. I'd struggled to find an age-appropriate way to explain that sometimes adults protect the wrong people, that sometimes families make mistakes, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to take care of you fail to do their job properly. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused about what's important," I'd finally said. "But I want you to know that what happened to you is not okay, and it's never going to happen again. I promise." After she fell asleep, I'd sat in my living room for a long time, just thinking. I thought about the kind of lesson this experience was teaching Ruby. If I let this slide, if I pretended it wasn't a big deal, if I accepted my family's narrative that Ruby had somehow been at fault, what would that teach her about standing up for herself? What would it teach her about accepting mistreatment from people who claimed to love her? I thought about my own childhood, and all the times I'd been told to keep the peace instead of standing up for myself. All the times I'd been made to feel like my feelings didn't matter as much as Monica's. All the times I'd been expected to be the bigger person, to apologize first, to smooth things over. I'd spent my entire life being the accommodating sister, the one who didn't cause drama, the one who made sacrifices to keep everyone else happy. And where had it gotten me? It had gotten me to a place where my own parents thought it was acceptable for Monica to assault my daughter and then blame the daughter for the assault. Well, I was done being accommodating. I was done prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my daughter's well-being. I was done being the bigger person when other people were determined to be small, petty, and cruel. See, there are some things my family doesn't know about my life. Since my divorce 3 years ago, I've been working as a freelance investigative researcher. I help lawyers gather information for cases, do background checks for companies, and sometimes work with private investigators on various projects. I'm very good at finding information that people would prefer to keep hidden, and I have access to databases and resources that most people don't even know exist. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well and it allows me the flexibility to be present for Ruby when she needs me. Most of my cases involve insurance fraud, corporate espionage, or helping attorneys build cases for divorces and custody disputes. I've tracked down hidden assets, uncovered affairs, and exposed financial improprieties. I've learned how to follow paper trails, how to cross-reference public records, and how to piece together patterns of behavior from seemingly unrelated information. The skills I've developed in this job have made me very good at seeing through people's public facades to understand what's really going on in their lives. And over the years, just through casual observation and the occasional favor for friends and family, I'd noticed some interesting discrepancies in my relatives' carefully maintained public images. I'd never intended to use any of this information for personal reasons. In fact, I'd gone out of my way to avoid digging too deeply into my family members' private business. But when you're trained to notice patterns and inconsistencies, it's hard to turn off that part of your brain completely. For instance, I'd noticed that Monica's social media posts about her unemployment struggles didn't quite match up with some of the party planning activities I'd observed her doing around town. When you're allegedly struggling financially, you don't typically invest in professional-grade catering equipment or maintain a dedicated party planning vehicle. I'd also noticed some interesting coincidences in my dad's retirement consulting work. Projects he'd been involved in approving during his final months at the city planning office had a funny way of becoming clients for his new consulting business shortly after his retirement. And my mom's volunteer work at the church had always seemed remarkably well-funded for a small congregation, until I'd started noticing that the financial reports never quite seemed to add up to the actual expenditures I observed during church events. These weren't things I'd gone looking for. They were just inconsistencies that had caught my attention over time, filed away in the back of my mind without any particular purpose. But now, sitting in my living room at 11 p.m. with my daughter's tear-stained pajamas in the laundry basket and the memory of Monica's hand hitting Ruby's face playing on repeat in my head, I suddenly had a very specific purpose for this information. Over the years, I've learned some interesting things about my family members, things I never had any reason or intention to use against them, until now. Once Ruby was asleep, I sat down at my computer and started thinking through everything I knew about my family's various activities. Over the years, I'd casually observed some interesting inconsistencies in their behavior, but I'd never had any reason to investigate further. Tonight, that was going to change. I thought about Monica's unemployment claims that never quite seemed to match her lifestyle. She'd been supposedly struggling financially for 8 months, yet she always seemed to have money for elaborate party supplies and professional-grade equipment. I'd seen her advertising party planning services on local Facebook groups, and I'd noticed her at various events around town clearly working as an organizer rather than just attending as a guest. There were also some things about my dad's retirement consulting that had always bothered me. Projects he'd been involved in approving during his final months at the city planning office had a funny way of becoming clients for his new business shortly after he left the city. The timing seemed awfully convenient, and some of the payment amounts I'd overheard him discussing seemed quite generous for simple consulting work. And my mom's volunteer work at the church had always puzzled me. The financial reports never quite seemed to add up to the actual expenditures I observed during church events, and she always seemed to have extra cash for helping Monica with various expenses, despite being on a fixed income. These weren't things I'd actively investigated, they were just patterns I'd noticed as someone trained to spot inconsistencies. But sitting there in my living room, with Ruby's tear-stained pajamas in the laundry basket and the memory of Monica's hand hitting my daughter's face fresh in my mind, I realized I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I made a plan. Tomorrow, I would use my professional resources to document everything properly. I would gather evidence, compile records, and build cases that could actually stand up to scrutiny. Tonight, I would prepare myself mentally for what I might find and what I might need to do with that information. I knew this was a line I'd never crossed before, using my professional skills against my own family. But Ruby's safety was more important than my comfort with family boundaries. If Monica could physically assault a 6-year-old and my parents could blame the child for being assaulted, then clearly normal family dynamics weren't going to protect Ruby from future incidents. I spent some time researching the legal implications of unemployment fraud, conflict of interest violations, and embezzlement. I wanted to understand exactly what kind of leverage I might have and what the real-world consequences could be for each type of violation. Knowledge is power, and I needed to be powerful enough to ensure Ruby's safety. As I was reading through various legal statutes and precedent cases, my mind kept wandering back to all the times I'd been expected to be the accommodating one in family conflicts. All the times I'd been told to keep the peace, to be understanding, to make allowances for Monica's difficult personality. Well, I was done making allowances. I was done being understanding about behavior that hurt innocent people. Ruby deserved better than a family that would protect her abuser and blame her for being victimized. I thought about calling some of my professional contacts to get advice on the best way to proceed, but it was getting late and this wasn't exactly the kind of situation I could discuss openly without potentially creating problems for myself professionally. Instead, I decided to trust my own judgment and experience. I had worked on enough cases involving family financial crimes to know that these situations rarely involved just one isolated incident. If Monica was committing unemployment fraud, there were probably other financial irregularities in her life. If my dad was taking inappropriate payments from developers, there were probably other ethical violations in his consulting work. If my mom was skimming from church donations, there were probably other instances of financial dishonesty. The key would be documenting everything properly and presenting it in a way that made the consequences crystal clear. I wasn't interested in destroying my family, I was interested in protecting Ruby and making sure this kind of incident never happened again. I also thought about the broader implications of what I was planning. Using professional investigative skills against family members was ethically complicated, even when the goal was protecting a child. But sometimes protecting innocent people requires making difficult choices about how far you're willing to go and what tools you're willing to use. By the time I finally went to bed around midnight, I had a clear plan for the next day. I would wake up early, spend the morning gathering evidence and building cases, and then I would wait to see how my family chose to handle the aftermath of the party incident. If they reached out with genuine apologies and acknowledgement of what had really happened, maybe I wouldn't need to use what I found. But if they tried to gaslight me or pressure me to accept their version of events, I would be ready with consequences they couldn't ignore. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and tried to get some sleep, knowing that the next day was going to be emotionally and professionally challenging. I was right about the timing. Exactly 37 minutes after we'd left the party, my phone rang. It was my dad. "Tina, you need to come back and apologize to Monica," he said without any preamble. "What Ruby did was unacceptable, and you embarrassed the whole family by making a scene." "What Ruby did?" I repeated slowly. "You mean accidentally getting a tiny bit of frosting on Sasha's shirt? That's what was unacceptable?" "She ruined Sasha's party," he continued. "Monica spent months planning this, and Ruby destroyed it with her careless behavior." I took a deep breath. "Dad, Monica physically assaulted my 6-year-old daughter. She slapped her hard enough to knock her down, then grabbed her hair and shoved her face into a cake. In front of 230 witnesses. And you think Ruby is the problem here?" "You're being overdramatic," he said, but I could hear a slight hesitation in his voice. "Monica was just disciplining her. Maybe she went a little overboard, but Ruby needed to learn." "No," I interrupted. What Ruby learned today is that her own family will choose to protect her abuser instead of protecting her. What she learned is that adults can hurt her and face no consequences as long as they're related to her. Is that really the lesson you wanted her to learn, Dad? There was a long pause. Tina, just come back and apologize. We can work this out as a family. You're right, we can work this out, I said calmly. But not the way you're thinking. I told you that you'd regret this, and I meant it. Check your email in about 5 minutes. You're right, we can work this out, I said calmly. But not the way you're thinking. I told you that you'd regret this, and I meant it. I'm going to need some time to gather my thoughts and decide how to proceed. I'll be in touch. I hung up and immediately got to work. It was now or never. I needed to use my professional skills to document everything I'd been casually observing about my family's activities over the years. I started with Monica's unemployment situation. Using my access to various databases and public records, I began building a comprehensive case. It didn't take long to find concrete evidence of what I'd suspected. Social media posts advertising celebrations by Jess Party Planning Services, testimonials from satisfied customers, and business registration records that showed she'd been operating under multiple names to avoid detection. I cross-referenced her unemployment claim dates with her social media activity and found dozens of instances where she was clearly working events during periods when she was claiming to be unemployed and actively seeking work. I documented everything with screenshots, timestamps, and corroborating evidence from multiple sources. The tax implications were even more straightforward. Public records showed no business income reported for the past 8 months, while her social media presence and customer testimonials clearly indicated substantial earnings from party planning services. The IRS takes this kind of discrepancy very seriously. Moving on to my father's consulting business, I used my knowledge of his former position at the city planning department to trace connections between projects he'd been involved in approving and his subsequent consulting clients. The patterns were unmistakable: 3 different development companies that had received favorable treatment during permit processes in his final year of employment had hired him as a consultant within months of his retirement. I documented the timeline of each project, the dates of key approvals, and the timing of his consulting contracts. The overlap created a clear picture of potential conflicts of interest that would be very difficult to explain away as coincidence. For my mother's situation at the church, I used my professional connections to access some background information about typical accounting practices for religious organizations. What I found were discrepancies in donation reporting that suggested systematic skimming over an extended period. I spent 4 hours building comprehensive files on each family member, documenting everything with the same level of detail and professionalism I would use for any other investigation. By the time I finished, it was early morning, and I had 3 separate dossiers that could stand up to legal scrutiny. The evidence was overwhelming in each case. Monica's unemployment fraud, my father's conflict of interest violations, and my mother's embezzlement were all documented with multiple sources and clear timelines. These weren't minor ethical lapses, they were serious legal violations that could result in criminal charges and substantial financial penalties. As I prepared the emails, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. These were people I loved, but they'd also just shown me that they were willing to prioritize protecting Monica over protecting Ruby. If they could watch a 6-year-old get assaulted and blame the child for the assault, then clearly normal family dynamics weren't going to protect Ruby from future incidents. The email was professional and to the point. These are the kinds of situations that can become very complicated very quickly. The choice of how to handle these matters is entirely up to how you choose to address what happened to Ruby today. We can resolve this as a family, with appropriate acknowledgement and assurance that such incidents will never happen again, or we can resolve this through appropriate official channels. You have until tomorrow at noon to decide how you'd like to proceed. I sent the email and then sat back to wait. I knew it wouldn't take long. 6 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my dad, and his voice was shaking. "Tina, what is this?" he asked, and I could hear the panic. "Where did you get this information?" "The same place I get all my information, Dad. I'm very good at my job." "You can't be serious about this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is family. You can't threaten your own family?" "I'm not threatening anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm offering choices. The same way you offered Ruby the choice to accept being assaulted or face further consequences. The same way you offered me the choice to accept your version of events or be ostracized from the family. Everyone gets to make choices." "This is blackmail," he said weakly. "This is consequences," I corrected. "For 3 years, I've watched you prioritize Monica over everyone else. I've watched you excuse her behavior, enable her entitlement, and ignore how she treats other people. Today, you watched her assault my daughter and decided she was the victim. So now you get to experience what it feels like when someone with more power decides to use it against you." My mom grabbed the phone. "Tina, honey, please. We can talk about this. Maybe we were a little harsh earlier. A little harsh? I repeated. Mom, you told a traumatized 6-year-old that she doesn't know how to behave, after she was physically attacked for an accident. You cleaned cake off the child who hadn't been touched and ignored the one who was bleeding from where she hit the ground. Ruby was bleeding? Mom's voice got smaller. Yes, she scraped her knee when she fell after Monica hit her. But none of you bothered to check on her, so you wouldn't know that. There was a long silence. Finally, Dad came back on the phone. What do you want, Tina? I want what I've always wanted, I said. I want my daughter to be treated with respect and kindness by her family. I want Monica to acknowledge that what she did was wrong and apologize to Ruby properly. I want all of you to understand that what happened today was not Ruby's fault, and I want to know that nothing like this will ever happen again. And if we do that, you'll delete these files? If you do that genuinely, and if I believe you understand why it's necessary, then yes. These files will disappear forever. But if this happens again, if Ruby is ever treated badly by any of you again, if you ever try to make her feel like she's the problem when she's actually the victim, then I'll remember that I gave you a chance to do the right thing and you chose not to take it seriously. Tina, I don't know what to say, Dad admitted. You don't have to say anything to me right now, I told him. But you do need to have some conversations with Monica and with Mom, and then you all need to have a conversation with Ruby. A real conversation, where you acknowledge what actually happened and take responsibility for how you handled it. 3 hours later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Monica standing there, and she looked like she'd been crying. Behind her were my parents, both looking uncomfortable and ashamed. Can we come in? Monica asked quietly. We need to talk to Ruby. I let them in, and Ruby came out of her room, still in her pajamas, with a small bandage on her scraped knee. When she saw them, she immediately hid behind my legs. Monica knelt down to Ruby's level and spoke very softly. Ruby, I need to apologize to you. What I did at the party was wrong. I was angry about the cake, but that doesn't mean I should have hit you or hurt you. You didn't do anything bad, it was an accident, and accidents happen. I'm very sorry that I scared you and made you cry. Ruby looked up at me, and I nodded encouragingly. It's okay, Aunt Monica, she whispered. I'm sorry I got cake on Sasha's shirt. No, sweetheart, Monica said, and she was crying again. You don't need to apologize. What happened to Sasha's shirt doesn't matter at all. What matters is that I hurt you, and that was wrong. Can you forgive me? Ruby nodded solemnly, and Monica very gently asked if she could give her a hug. Ruby allowed it, though she was still clearly nervous. My parents took turns apologizing as well. Dad admitted that he should have made sure Ruby was okay before worrying about anything else, and Mom acknowledged that what she'd said about Ruby not knowing how to behave was unfair and hurtful. We love you very much, Ruby, Mom said. And we should have shown that better today. We're sorry. After they left, Ruby asked me if Aunt Monica was going to be mean to her again. I told her that I didn't think so, but that if anyone ever treated her badly, she should tell me right away and I would handle it. Are you mad at Grandma and Grandpa? She asked. I admitted. But I think they understand now that what happened was wrong, and I think they're going to try to do better. Good, Ruby said matter-of-factly. Because I still want to see them, but I don't want them to be mean to me. The next day, I got a call from Monica. She wanted to throw Ruby her own party to make up for what had happened, nothing huge, just a small gathering with a few friends and a special cake. I told her that wasn't necessary, but she insisted. I need to make this right, Tina, she said. Not just with you, but with Ruby. I need her to know that she's important and valued, and I need to prove to myself that I can do better. Ruby's makeup party was beautiful. Monica went out of her way to make sure Ruby felt special and celebrated. She hired face painters, got a bounce house, and made sure every detail was perfect. But more importantly, she was gentle and patient with all the kids, and she made a point of telling everyone what a wonderful little girl Ruby was. During the party, Monica pulled me aside. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, she said. I think I was so stressed about everything being perfect that I lost sight of what really mattered. When Ruby accidentally got frosting on Sasha's shirt, it felt like all my planning was ruined, and I just snapped. But seeing her face after I hit her, seeing how scared and confused she was. I've never felt so ashamed of anything in my life. I'm glad you recognize that, I said. But Monica, it can't happen again. Ever. Ruby trusts people easily, but if someone breaks that trust, it's very hard to rebuild. I know, she said. And I'm grateful you're giving me the chance to rebuild it. A few weeks later, my parents invited us over for Sunday dinner. It was tentative at first, everyone was walking on eggshells, being extra careful and polite. But gradually, things started to feel more natural again. Ruby was still a little cautious around Monica, but she was warming up to the idea that the scary aunt from the party had been replaced by someone who was making an effort to be kind. My mom pulled me aside during one of these dinners. "Tina, I need to ask you something. Those files you sent us. How long have you known?" "In some cases, a long time," I admitted. "But I never had any intention of doing anything with that information. It was just there. Background noise for my work life that happened to involve people I'm related to." "But you decided to use it when Ruby was hurt." "I decided to use every tool at my disposal to protect my daughter and make sure this never happened again," I corrected. "If that meant leveraging information I discovered, then yes, I was willing to do that." Mom nodded slowly. "I understand why you did it. I don't like it, but I understand it. And honestly, it forced us to confront some things we'd been avoiding." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that we've been enabling Monica for years. Making excuses for her behavior, cleaning up her messes, pretending her problems were everyone else's fault. When she hit Ruby, our first instinct was to protect her instead of protecting the child who'd been hurt. That's not who we want to be." "And the other issues in those files?" Mom looked embarrassed. "I've been working with the church treasurer to set up a payment plan to return what I took. It's going to take a while, but I'm making it right. Your father is cutting ties with those developers and consulting with a lawyer about whether he needs to report anything. And Monica is working with an accountant to file amended tax returns and pay back the unemployment office." "I'm proud of all of you for handling it that way," I said, and I meant it. "We're trying to do better," she said. "For Ruby, and for you, and for ourselves." 3 months later, Monica threw another birthday party for Sasha, her 9th birthday. This time, it was a much smaller affair, held in their backyard with close family and friends. Ruby was excited to go, and I was cautiously optimistic about how it would go. The party was lovely. Monica was relaxed and genuinely seemed to be enjoying herself rather than stressing about perfection. When one of the kids spilled juice on their shirt, she laughed it off and helped them clean up without any drama. When Ruby accidentally stepped on another child's toe during a game, Monica quickly helped both kids feel better and got the game back on track. During cake time, Ruby was standing right next to Sasha, helping her make a wish. As Sasha blew out the candles, Ruby clapped enthusiastically, and her hand bumped the edge of the cake plate. A small piece of frosting fell off onto the table. Everyone froze for just a second. Ruby looked worried, I tensed up, and Monica paused in her cake cutting. Then Monica smiled at Ruby and said, "Oops. Good thing we have plenty of cake to go around. Can you help me serve the pieces?" Ruby beamed and carefully helped distribute cake to all the guests. Later, when we were getting ready to leave, she hugged Monica tightly and said, "Thank you for the fun party, Aunt Monica. I love you." "I love you too, Ruby," Monica replied. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to show you that properly." As we drove home, Ruby was chattering happily about the party and how much fun she'd had. "Mommy," she said suddenly, "I'm glad Aunt Monica isn't scary anymore." "Me too, sweetheart," I said. "Me too." Looking back on everything that happened, I don't regret the way I handled it. Some people might say I went too far, that blackmailing family members was an extreme response. But I would argue that physically assaulting a 6-year-old child and then blaming the child for being assaulted was a far more extreme action than anything I did in response. Ruby deserved to be protected and defended. She deserved to have adults who would stand up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself. She deserved to know that her safety and well-being were more important than anyone's pride or convenience. The information I used to motivate my family's behavior change was real, it was accurate, and it was obtained legally through my work. I didn't manufacture evidence or make false accusations. I simply made it clear that choices have consequences, and that the consequence of choosing to protect an abuser over a victim would be having their own poor choices exposed. Did it work? Absolutely. Monica learned to control her temper and treat children with patience and kindness. My parents learned to think about who actually needed protection in any given situation. Ruby learned that she has people in her life who will fight for her when she needs them to. Most importantly, Ruby learned that what happened to her at that first party was not her fault, not acceptable, and not something she had to endure quietly. She learned that she has value and worth, and that people who love her will take action to keep her safe. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable bad behavior, even when that behavior comes from family members. Sometimes, protecting an innocent child requires being willing to make adults uncomfortable with the consequences of their actions. Ruby is now 7, and she's thriving. She's confident, happy, and secure in the knowledge that she is loved and protected. Monica has become the kind of aunt that Ruby actually looks forward to spending time with, and my parents have shown Ruby through their actions that she matters to them. The files I compiled that night have long since been deleted, just as I promised they would be. But the lesson remains: actions have consequences, and people who choose to hurt children should be prepared to face the consequences of that choice, no matter who they are or how closely related to the child they might be. Ruby will never remember the details of what I did to make sure she was protected. But she will remember that when someone hurt her, the people who loved her took action to make sure it didn't happen again. And that's a lesson I'm proud to have taught her.